This is the Pepperwood Podcast, a production of Pepperwood, a nonprofit conservation organization based at a 3,200-acre nature reserve near Santa Rosa, California, in the heart of the traditional homeland of the Wapo people. At Pepperwood, we aim to inspire conservation through science. And on this show, we talk to scientists, stewards, and environmental educators about what they do and how they do it. We hope to give you a glimpse into the real experiences of folks who devote their lives to taking care of local ecosystems and sharing them with others. Welcome to the second episode of the Pepperwood Podcast. I'm Julianne, your host and part of the education team here at Pepperwood, and I'm back with another great conversation. Today we have a conversation with Devyn Friedfel, Assistant Preserve Manager at Pepperwood and Certified California Burn Boss. And therefore, what should we discuss if not fire? The use of prescribed fire in land stewardship is a big, complex topic, so I asked Devyn to start by telling us about just one of the many practices that falls under that big umbrella, namely pile burning. Hopefully, we can invite Devyn back to talk in detail about other related practices like broadcast burns and wildfire recovery, both of which are mentioned in this conversation but not fully delved into. For today, believe me, the practice of pile burning gives us plenty to talk about. So let's get to it. We hope you enjoy my conversation with Devyn Friedfel, which took place in August of 2024. Devyn, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. And I'm really looking forward to hearing about some specific projects. But first, I would love to hear from you just a perspective on fire in general and like how we use fire, how fire has been here in California before. I just Googled fire in California and all I got was a bunch of really depressing things about the history of wildfires within the last decade. But that's not history. That's almost current events. So
right.
What is the history of fire in California from somebody who is trained in this sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, the history of fire in California goes back since to the dawn of time, or since time immemorial, as some folks like to say it. But really, there's clear scientific evidence through tree ring sampling, through soil sampling, and then also, most importantly, through indigenous storytelling and oral histories of the people that have been on this land for thousands of years, and how they have very specific uses and practices of fire that range immensely throughout the state. And you just think of how many different indigenous communities there were pre-settlement in California, and they all had very specific, unique fire practices for very specific outcomes, and they largely varied. But I think one thing that's consistent through them is the use of humans using fire to steward the land. And
that's a beautiful thing to think about, is that fire was a good tool long before we thought of it as this sort of like destructive force that we have to consider every day.
Yeah. And then during settlement times, there's some really cool like early journal documents from like a lot of the early settlers just talking about smoke in the sky and coming and seeing burns, and then also when the Spanish started the mission system, stories about that. And it was really just this Western perspective of that fire is bad, and that's just kind of driven the narrative really since then, and has really created this culture of fire suppression instead of stewarding with fire. And that the results of the fire suppression effort has led to fuel load accumulation, stressed out plants because of competition, and then also not receiving kind of the healing benefits that fire has brought.
We kind of got ourselves a backlog of work to do. Or, at least some impacts from not having done this work that had been being done for so long.
And then we get these big mega wildfires because of this fuel loading, and then you get more tree mortality, and you get your old growth trees that are your carbon sequesters dying, and then creating more litter, and then leading to the next catastrophic wildfire. And so it's like this big mega destructive fire leads to the next big mega destructive fire. So it's this positive feedback loop of like the lack of fires actually leading to more destructive fires, instead of using this fire as a process that has stewarded this land for countless generations. And I think one thing that's been really apparent to me is watching the response from the Tubbs fire from the ecology at Pepperwood, and just seeing how all of the native species thrived in their own unique ways, whether it be a mass production of the geophytes and bulbs popping up everywhere after the fire because they finally are getting a nutrient flush and some additional sunlight because the canopy's been opened up, to the oak trees basal sprouting and epicormic sprouting from their trunks, to wildflower blooms like I've never seen before. And I could go on and on of just like all these different ways that our California ecology responded. There's some wildlife camera initial kind of knowledge from Stephen Hamrick, and Morgan Gray, our wildlife team, that really showed, hey, after the fires, we saw a really big increase in herbivores, and then a big increase in carnivores a few years later, and just kind of watching that succession just bounce back really fast. And seeing that on a day-to-day basis was like, wow, these plants know what to do more with fire than we humans do in our Western culture. And because that fire knowledge has been lost in our culture, but the plants, the animals, they remember.
Well, that's tremendous. Well, I know it's a big, big undertaking to reintroduce this process like in a holistic way. So let's just take it one piece at a time. Like one of the biggest projects that, what's certainly one of the most like visually obvious elements that we see as we walk around Pepperwood is this burn pile process that you've been generating these burn piles and burning them and then processing them afterward. So I'm very curious about them. Let's just start with who or which species are getting piled up and burned in these burn piles.
Yeah, so these burn piles are really our first step at addressing our fuels issue. Like I said, the fuel accumulation that happened because of fire suppression has really put us in a place where if we want to do a prescribed fire under current conditions, it will probably burn hotter than we would want it to. We might get high tree mortality. Even if we're burning under the conditions that we want, our fuel loading is so high that there could be some adverse ecological effects. Clint McKay, the chair of our Native Advisory Council and Indigenous educator at Pepperwood, he's talked to me about how cultural burns that had happened in this area were really low intensity, slow moving.
But that's just not possible in our current forests,
right? So you look at some of the fuel loading and it's not really possible. So our pile burning effort has really been this first approach of getting fuels reduction in. So what we're going and doing is we're actually moving through, we're really focusing on our oak woodlands first, and kind of cutting out a lot of the dead down fuel that had either happened over years of the lack of fire, and then also as a repercussion of both the Tubbs and the Kincaid fire, right? So that killed a lot of trees, and then we're kind of left with more fuel loading left over, which is basically, setting us up for the next big burn, that wildfire. So we're going through and cutting this material, building like roughly 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot little cube piles. They vary a little bit, and then placing them throughout the forest in areas where when they burn, they're actually not going to cause a lot of damage to some of these large trees, right? So we're not putting them up at the base of a tree. Right. We're waiting for those kind of like openings in the canopy, setting them under there. A lot of times we're able to target these piles and put them on some invasive species that we maybe don't want. So because those piles are burning really hot, we can actually use them to potentially benefit and knocking back some other vegetation that we maybe don't want. So French broom is a good example. Nice. If we have like a little patch of French broom and there's a bunch of little germinants coming up, we can place that pile on that and use the pile to reduce fuel, but also target some of our invasive species. Harding grass is another species that we'll do that with. So yeah, just really trying to not just think about these piles as fuels reduction avenues, but it's really what they're meant for. But how else can we use pile burning and this fire in this way that is maybe not historically hasn't been a big part of the fire process through time when we're going through and
but then neither were some of these invasive species, right?
Exactly, right? So things are a little different. We're going through and kind of doing stuff at scale, like a 70-acre scale, 100-acre scale, where we're going and cutting up the dead wood, piling it across 100 acres, and we get left with, 3,000 burn piles.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. So that's even, we're looking at a 3,200 acre preserve. We're not even touching most of that, right? Just even you say 100 acres can generate 3,000 piles. That's an immense amount of work.
Yeah.
And how long does it take to do some of that thinning work?
Yeah. So that thinning work, we usually will contract out. We'll do some of it in-house. We work with some really awesome partners, both on the funding side to kind of support this work, and also some really great skilled contractors that'll come out and really listen, have ecologically focus, and really work with us to get the end product that we want. And depending on how many people are out, the chainsaw mechanical work usually takes about 2 weeks. And then burning about 3,000 piles is more than probably a year's work. Our restoration team here is pretty small. Mm-hmm. So last year we burnt over 2,000 piles. I think that was the most we've burnt. I just, it was a lot of myself last winter, but I really leaned heavily on our partners and the Good Fire Alliance volunteers. The Good Fire Alliance is our Sonoma County Prescribed Burn Association. Mm-hmm. So it is just a loose group of folks that are on a listserv that are really interested in bringing back fire in an ecologically minded way, and some folks that maybe don't have access to land, some folks that are maybe trying to build their skill set, some maybe landowners that are interested in bringing fire back to their land. And so I have called on them a lot. I've called on partners such as Fire Forward, regional parks, state parks, Laguna Foundation, Land Paths,
oh my gosh, there's a wide network there.
It is really just like all the environmental nonprofits and state, county, federal agencies that are really interested in fire have all really banded together to support each other and built a really strong community around bringing fire back in a good way. Here at Pepperwood, we're really fortunate to have our Native Advisory Council, which has really helped guide us. And really, I think what we're trying to get to with these pile burns, and is something that our council is really supportive of, is, hey, yeah, let's get these fuels reduction piles in to prepare the land best for future cultural burns, right?
Well, you're already getting to my next question, which is how, as we do this work, all these pile burns, these thousands of pile burns, what is going to be the impact on future stewardship work at Pepperwood? And so it sounds like you're heading that direction. What are some of the possibilities if we continue with this process?
Yeah, that is our dream, right? To, I think there's 8 to 15 years is the rough fire return interval in oak woodlands in California is kind of what some of the literature says. So if I get my fuels reduction, if we get our fuels reduction down to a really good place, hopefully we'll be doing our maintenance burns with broadcast prescribed fire and cultural burning, okay. And really helping the future stewardship of the preserve and engaging with our council and supporting their target goals with cultural burning, with food sovereignty goals, but really feel it's our responsibility to prepare the land as best as possible for those things, right? A lot of those practices aren't really feasible under current conditions. There's a lot of physical, mechanical work that needs to happen to reduce the fuel loads, to get nature to kind of look like it did pre-settlement. And it's never going to look the same. We have climate change, we have invasive species, but trying to nudge the needle closer to
at least functionally the way it used to be.
Functionally, at least the way it used to be, and really providing that space for cultural practitioners to practice what they've practiced on this landscape for thousands of years. I really do think that is going to be the best ecological stewardship process as possible, because it's a coevolution thing that happened, right? People burning, plants evolving to those practices. So we really need to work to get back to those practices to do the best for the plants and animals and soil and air quality and water quality and our fish downstream. So really, I think it's all really connected, and bringing back fire in that way that it had historically been here is a huge key to it.
Yeah, that's a big goal. So it's like all of this physical and mechanical and I assume it's pretty costly work to be doing this mechanical thinning and then compiling it into burns. But this phase of it is like an investment in the long-term ability of then maybe broadcast burns coming back to the forest and being able to do a lot of that work for us.
Yeah. And so that's the ideal goal. I think another really big piece of that is creating Pepperwood as a strategic fuel break for future wildfires. We're working with CAL FIRE, we're working with Sonoma County Fire District, we're working with Northern Sonoma County Fire District, we're working with Fire Forward, but really CAL FIRE Chief Nichols has called out Pepperwood as a potential strategic fuel break. We have grassy ridges along the Mayakama mountains, which is not super common. We have a road system that runs right down the middle.
Yeah. There's access for all the vehicles that would be required. Yeah.
Right. And so when wildfires do break out, we work closely with CAL FIRE. They help us on a lot of these projects. So they know Pepperwood property well. They know where our projects have happened. They know where our road system are. And so that they can strategically use Pepperwood in those emergency scenarios to make a stand. We saw that during the Kincaid fire. They put in about 15 miles of bulldozer lines and really stopped the Kincaid fire from dropping back down into Mark West Springs and creating that same corridor effect that happened in the Tubbs fire.
Well, that's an unbelievable thought, to think that not only are we sort of stewarding the lands in its sort of immediate environs, but like on a landscape level, we could be safeguarding whole communities potentially, or at least being a part of that effort.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think I will tell people the most environmentally friendly thing you can do is stop your house from burning, right? Defensible space is wonderful and necessary. Home hardening, like if you're a homeowner or a landowner, that's like where you should start, is protect your house and then continue to work out. And I think pile burning is really a great way for the rest of our community to kind of slowly start chipping away. You mentioned that, hey, this mechanical thinning is really expensive and really time consuming and really energy. But we're going on scale. So for a lot of folks in Sonoma County, they have 5 acres, 10 acres, and they can really start to work on it themselves, hold community events, ask the Good Fire Alliance for support. And I think pile burning is just like a really great way to build people's comfortability with fire, right? Yeah. Hey, there's a contained area. It's going to stay in this area. I can bring a hose. I got a shovel. I can start this with a newspaper and a lighter. And I just have my garden hose, and I'm actually doing it while it's pouring rain. So
you feel super safe.
I feel super safe. It can be done in a really, really safe way. And it allows people to build their comfortability. It allows them to bring their kids out and roast some marshmallows over, hey, maybe it's a little bit bigger than a campfire.
Well, bonfire, parties were a long-term, love of a community, right? That's a good time.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it just provides an opportunity for community. How many people sit around a campfire together? How many people, I think probably the first human gatherings, right, probably involve fire of cooking food.
Well, in the same way that, you're taking pile burns and you're saying, oh, maybe as a fringe benefit, we can also, pile them on invasive seeds and maybe get them out of the ground. Maybe from a campfire perspective, we love a campfire. We love sitting around it. Why not have that also be part of you hardening your home, right?
Yep.
It's nice to take something that you love and then know that it also has like a bigger purpose.
Yeah. And for land stewardship and for staff of about 4 that are stewarding 3,000 acres, and also building maintenance and road maintenance and finding funding. we have to stack our benefits, and we have to rely on community. And I think that's the same with everybody, right? Like, it's such a big undertaking to steward land. And we also have the rest of our lives to try and go live. So bringing people together to steward land, and using fire as an opportunity to bring people together and create these multiple effects. One of the other things that we're doing, and I think is fairly feasible, is the opportunity to reintroduce native plants in those burn scars. So, right, let's say I built a pile on a bunch of French broom and I burnt it out, and now I killed the seed bank, and we have a little 4 foot by 4 foot square circle-y thing that is charcoal and bare ground, and there's no seeds there. So I can either wait for the thistles. I swear thistle seeds will find your burn pile scar.
They're good at that, yeah.
Or we can throw some native seeds in there. And mix the soil up and establish some native grasses in that area before. We're really fortunate to have a nursery and a native grass growing program here at Pepperwood. So really, we've just blended these two ideas of pile burning and native grass plug growing and put them together. And the results that we've had so far are incredible. The grasses seem to love the competition-free, nutrient-rich soil that is where the pile burn was, and those plants are thriving. And then a lot of times we plant them in January. They're going to set seed in May, and then the first seeds laying down in this blank ground are native grass seeds. So we're starting to establish that. Now, we can go back 4 years, 5 years later. I think we've been doing it for about 5 years now. I can still see where we plugged native grasses into those burn piles. Well, some annual grasses are moving in, but the dominant species in those scars are native perennial grasses.
Well, and you're doing some great observation with that, but I think we're also taking that a step further. Isn't there a researcher who's doing a bit of analysis on some of the previous burn piles, some of which have been planted, some of which have not been planted? So that's something that we might actually be seeing some data from, right?
Yeah. Some researchers over at UC Davis are really looking into that, kind of as a small research project, potentially piloting into a dissertation project that might be a little bit more involved in if seeding can work, what maybe those native plants adding can do to the soil microbial. Like, we can get really involved, and I think there's a lot of interesting things happening with like soil microbes in native plants and what those need. And so trying to, especially in a post-burn ground, trying to get those native plants in established first to hopefully reintroduce or create the connectivity of those potential fungal, bacterial kind of benefits that those soils have.
The complexity of an ecosystem. Yeah, so much to analyze.
And that's getting way above my pay grade. I catch things on fire.
Well, that's why we partner with people at UC Davis who can maybe tell us about that. So great. You've already touched on a lot of the community connectivity, but what would you say makes this work possible in the long term?
Community. Well, I do think that it's people. I remember the first like broadcast prescribed burn I went to in Humboldt County, and it was really cool in the burn, but like the part that captured me after was the amount of people that came together. There was kids running around. There was the grandparents made barbecued a bunch of food and made a big food potluck for everybody that was working, dogs running around, kids running around, firefighters, old ranching families, some indigenous community members, old hippies that had moved to Humboldt County in the 70s, all sharing a meal together around this idea of fire, right? And earlier, before we got on the mic, you mentioned barn raisings, and it really has that same feel as like we can't do this by ourselves. We need a community around us,
and so it creates the community essentially. Like the project itself is what drives people being close to each other.
Yeah, and here at Pepperwood, we would not be able to get almost anything done without our volunteers and our community that comes to our support, and we feel that same obligation to our community, right? So when people reach out to us, hey, what do you think we should do about this? I might not have the right answer, but I'll try and point you in the right direction. We'll try and offer our resources support. We go to everybody's prescribed burn that we can to support with our resources and our time and our energy, because we really do believe that this work needs community around it. And as soon as you start engaging with it, it's really clear. There's not anybody that I've worked with that thinks they can do it by themselves.
Hopefully there's not too many that want to, because it's nicer in a group.
Yeah. And we, I would really encourage folks we offer pile burn workshops. I'll host 2, maybe 3 pile burn workshops at Pepperwood. I'll oftentimes go out to different areas of the county that it's a little far to get to Pepperwood and offer those pile burn workshops as well. Fire Forward offers a number of trainings. And then through our volunteer work days, the first Saturday of the month, we do almost all of our native grass work happens because of volunteers, and we do it with our volunteers. We collect seeds, we clean seeds, we propagate seeds, we plant into burn piles, and then we start all back over again and do it again. So it's really fun to watch volunteers engage with this process, whether it be from the plant side, whether it be from the fire side, or whatever their interests are. It really is bringing these different folks with different skill sets together with this kind of common goal of making our communities fire safe, and restoring our ecological processes.
Right. So through those volunteer work days, you can either join in on the grass seed part of it, or I think there's also opportunities with that to help us build our burn piles and collect our scattered wood, our extra fuel, right? So whichever part you're the most interested in, or both.
And burning piles. A huge portion of our piles have been burnt by volunteers. I encourage folks to get involved with the GFA. That's usually how my volunteers come from. And I think if you go to our Good Fire frequently asked questions on the Pepperwood website, there is a link to that listserv there.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that. Yeah, the Good Fire FAQ is a great article that I think you helped generate. It was, I think it originally came up last summer, but very accessible on the website. And in that is embedded another really great resource, which is a video that includes you and Michael, but also Clint McKay from our
Native Advisory
Council, and talking about how that was also the first cultural burn that took place at Pepperwood. And so really fun if you're curious about what it looks like to have
the first in recent history.
Yes, absolutely. But if you're curious what it looks like to have even a broadcast burn on a piece of land, it's beautiful. It's not terrifying at all. So that's a really nice little resource there as well.
Yeah, and I think, if people are scared of fire, go watch a prescribed burn, go do a pile burn.
You'll fall asleep.
Engage yourself. Yeah, I mean, I think rightfully so, people have a fear of fire. I mean, especially in our community that has experienced traumatic wildfires. And we also have a history of media sensationalizing fires. As you mentioned, you will fall asleep if you want to take a nap during a prescribed fire. A lot of times it's really slow and low and moving really slow. Sometimes there's a little bits of excitement, and that's why people are there, and you got to be paying attention. But
it goes on for hours and hours, and it moves, like, it just creeps along. So you're in it for the whole long haul there. And so it's great. I mean, if you're coming from a place of like the intensity and the fear of fire, I mean, nothing like a boring old prescribed burn to remind you that fire can be a really truly controlled thing if you are approaching it carefully and you've planned it well, which as one of the first burn bosses in California, if not the first, you've gotten the training in it to know how to set things up for success, right?
Yeah, and I'm hugely fortunate. There's a lot of fire knowledge in our state, and I'm fortunate to have some wonderful leaders and mentors, and we're super fortunate to have two awesome champions of prescribed fire in this county, and that's Sasha Berlman. Dr. Sasha Berlman from Audubon Canyon Ranch, and Chief Marshall Tuberville from both CAL FIRE and Northern Sonoma County Fire District, which have, you need leaders to kind of push boundaries, and we're really fortunate to have some strong leadership in this community to help push the positive fire narrative.
All right. So we've got a building community, a growing community of people, including our volunteers who are supporting this. We've got the community leadership from people like Dr. Berlman and Marshall Tuberville. And then what about funding? where does the funding come from? Is this just from our Pepperwood donors? And I don't say just. I mean, is it from the general fund? Does this also include some grant funding? Is that part of your job, is to kind of help fund what we need?
Yeah, absolutely. Grants come in, especially around equipment and stuff and implementation. There's government support programs. Our local RCDs are really supportive of this. CAL FIRE has funding for this. NRCS, which is a federal agency that supports natural resource conservation, puts funding toward this. We've gotten funding from the Coastal Conservancy or Coastal Commission, and just other partners. And then a lot of times it's, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back kind of thing where, hey, I need some extra people. I need another engine. Can you come and support us? So it's a lot of volunteer. The time, the people that show up to volunteer, it's like mostly a volunteer activity. Like a lot of the people aren't, some people are getting paid by their agencies and stuff, but a lot of the people aren't getting paid. Also, huge credit to our local fire districts that have been really big supportive, especially with resources when we need them, such as engines and hoses and stuff like that.
Well, that really runs the gamut, right? From grassroots support all the way up to institutional support. So it sounds like there's a lot of really big players who are in fire of this process, which is good because it's a big one. It's a big undertaking to get this this system back to a place where it can function properly. So what an incredible work that you're doing.
So I think we've taken baby steps in this journey of bringing fire back to this community, the Sonoma County community, the greater North Bay community. I think there's still a lot of need for engagement with our indigenous communities. I think their wealth of knowledge and just inherent right to be able to burn on a lot of these lands and have access to a lot of these lands is very clear. And I think there's slowly but surely there's some efforts being made and some connections being made. But I do think that's like a section we need to continue to push a lot harder in, getting more research and more data and kind of like continue to study the long-term impacts and short-term impacts so that we can have more documentation to kind of prove these things, hopefully create, legislation around this, create more funding for it. Well, there's still some challenges. Not everybody's on board. There's still some pushback from some community.
So maybe also making sure that people hear the good story about how fire can be a real benefit to us, especially in the face of massive wildfires and the concern over those.
Yeah, and I think there was this really big effort right after our fires, and we've had a few fires here and there, but nothing super damaging in the last couple of years, and I think people forget quickly. So
let's keep keep the story alive, keep the concern and the hope alive for what can be a benefit. Right,
and I think just telling the story is really important, so everyone can contribute to our process in this. And I think I'm just I can end with this note: is there's not many things in the world that you have like land stewards, research ecologists, big government agencies like CAL FIRE and indigenous communities kind of all in agreement about something. And I think that one of the few things they're all in agreement about is we need to use fire as a tool to steward this land.
All right. So, and as you say, baby steps, right? We're taking those baby steps and we're going to see where they lead.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Devyn, for helping tell us this story.
Yeah. Thank you for having me and giving me your time.
Thank you again to Devyn Friedfel for joining us today on the Pepperwood Podcast. If you have any questions about what we discussed or would like to tell us what you thought, you can send us an email at podcast@pepperwoodpreserve.org. Thank you also to Stephanie Antonoro, Pepperwood's communication coordinator, and the whole Pepperwood team for supporting the production of this podcast. And now it's time to play the Nature's Sound Guess Who game. Thank you to the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and McCully Library for the acorn woodpecker sound recorded by Bob McGuire that you just heard in the game theme. and for many other wonderful and expertly identified nature sounds that we use in the podcast. To refresh your memory, if you listened to our first episode, or to introduce it to you if you haven't, here's how the game works. At the end of each episode, I play a nature sound. You have the time between episodes to guess, or apply your knowledge, or dive into some research, in short, to figure out which animal, vegetable, or mineral made that sound. You can email your guesses to podcast@pepperwoodpreserve.org, or respond to the corresponding post on our Facebook or Instagram, or just hold on to that thought until I reveal the sound maker in the following episode. Last time, in our first episode, the nature sound sounded just like this. And the sound maker is the California toad, scientifically known as Anaraxis boreas halophilus. This is the release call of the California toad as it was grasped across its back. The clip comes from californiaherps.com, an excellent online resource created by Gary Nafis, and so does the following quote. A release call is produced by a male toad or an unreceptive female toad when a male toad or other animal gets on its back and grabs its sides in the position used for mating or amplexus. It's a toad's way of saying, "Get off my back, let go." So there it is. Whether you had correctly guessed or not, I hope you enjoyed the dulcet tones of the California toad asserting its personal space and agency. Now, to spark your curiosity once again, here comes the next sound challenge, a new nature sound that I will reveal the identity of at the end of episode 3. Are you ready? Here it comes. Nature sound guess who in 3, 2, 1. And one more time in 3, 2, 1. I wonder who that could be. All will be revealed next time. Thank you again for joining us on the Pepperwood Podcast, and until next episode, don't forget to keep your ears tuned into nature.